Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the 12th episode of the Krishna Lite show. We get together Sunday afternoons at 1 o'clock to do a number of different things. One is to practice some of the rap songs that we use live on stage at the Festival of Colors that are suspended right now, but we want to keep sharp. We want to keep on our game. So you guys are the sounding board for us to keep those lyrics foremost in our mind. And we welcome your feedback as well. I think today we're going to take requests. We have a song on karma. We have a song on the spirit itself. We have a song in the Bhagavad Gita. We have a song about Hanuman. We have a song about Ganesh. We may indeed ask your opinion or take requests during the course of this particular episode. But I believe for the purposes of kicking off of our program, we'll just go ahead and seize the bull by the horns and do our karma song. Okay. And after that, we're going to share some reminiscences from Bhai Baba and my early experiences in Krishna Consciousness in the continent down under. If the music is too loud or too soft, it always indicates something to me in the comments section. We shape ourselves the joys and fears of which the coming life is made, and fill the future's atmosphere with sunshine or shade. The tissue of the life to be, we weave in colors all our own, and in the field of destiny, we reap where we have sown. Karma is action and reaction. You sow the seed, you face the deed. Whatever you do comes back to you. The law of cause and effect ensures the balance is perfect. Detecting whatever you do, good and bad, it will resurrect. The body may die, but your karma standing by. You'll be reborn to live and die. Continue to suffer and cry. As aroma follows the flower, as heat pursues the fire, your karma will trap you as soon as you leave the funeral pyre. Karma decides how you'll be reborn, comely or scorned, high or humiliated, straight or deformed, healthy or ill, long or short-lived, animal or human, sheltered or adrift. Karma is what makes the world go round. It's cause and effect right down there on the ground for those going over and around, up and down, bound by their deeds, bound by their needs. Is there any purpose to our life on this earth? Do we just die and continually take birth? Is there any escape from the pain of coming back again and again and again and again? Yes. You are not this flesh and you are not this mind. Designed as an eternal spirit in the image of the Almighty design. Assigned to His service sublime. Attracted by unselfish action. Serving the Lord with dispassion. Acting only for His satisfaction. Devoted souls achieve extraction from karmic reaction. Your eternal state is to serve the great Lord. Destroy your karma with the sword of His holy name. Don't dare to wake, state your claim, chant His holy name before it's too late. If you want to burn up your karma, act according to the Dharma, pleasing the Lord, fashioned by His hand. Act according to His plan and never come back to this mortal world again. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. Once again, we shape ourselves the joys and fear of which the coming life is made, and fill our future's atmosphere with sunshine or shade. The tissue of the life to be, we weave in colors all our own, and in the field of destiny we reap where we have sown. Here's another song that's not exactly on point so far the theme of karma is concerned. but it does have to do with reactions, accountability, ramifications. Loved ones will gaze at my silent face, clasp me with silent embrace. Shadows and darkness will fill the place 5 minutes after I die. Loving faces I'll no longer see. Murmuring voices will not reach me. But where, oh where will my spirit be 5 minutes after I die? The days of my life have flown, pursuing the illusion of hearth and home. Self-realization was postponed. I'm going to have to reap from the seeds that I've sown 5 minutes after I die. Too late to regain the good I lacked, discarded along my life's chosen track. My soul, its karma cannot unpack. Too late to redo, no turning back. 5 minutes after I die. Often I stifled conviction stirred, silenced the small voice, often heard. Thoughts of rebirth were deferred. Defending myself is going to sound absurd 5 minutes after I die. Though my senses were strong and I followed the throng, eternity seems awfully long. What if I realized I was wrong 5 minutes after I die? Truly a fool, pursuing illusion within death, view, doing deeds I could never undo, likely strong-armed into the wrong pew 5 minutes after I die. Our eternal state is to serve the great Lord and destroy our karma with the sword of his holy name. Don't dare to waste, stake your claims, chant his holy name before it's too late 5 minutes after you die. Loved ones will weep over my silent face, clasp me in silent embrace. Darkness and shadows will fill the place 5 minutes after I die. Sorrowing faces I'll no longer see. Murmuring voices will not reach me. Where, oh where will my spirit be 5 minutes after I die? The days of my life have flown, pursuing the illusion of hearth and home. Self-realization got postponed. I'm going to have to reap from the seeds that I've sown 5 minutes after I die. Often I stifled, conviction stirred, silenced, the small voice often heard. Thoughts of rebirth were deferred. Defending myself is going to sound absurd 5 minutes after I die. Too late to regain the good I lacked, discarded along my life's chosen track. My soul, its karma cannot unpack. Too late to redo, no turning back 5 minutes after I die. Though my senses are strong, and I follow the throng, eternity seems awfully long. What if I realized I was wrong 5 minutes after I die? Pursuing illusion just like a fool, within death's view, doing deeds that I can never undo, most likely strong-armed into the wrong pew 5 minutes after I die. My eternal state is to serve the great Lord and destroy your karma with the sword of his holy name. Don't dare to waste, stake your claims. Chant his holy name before it's too late 5 minutes after you die. 5 minutes after you die. Karma is action and reaction. You sow the seed, you face the deed, whatever you do comes back to you. The law of cause and effect ensures the balance is perfect. Detecting whatever you do, good and bad, it will resurrect. Death is not the end, just a bend. Whatever you've done will circle back again. The body may die, but your karma standing by. You'll be reborn to live and die, continue to suffer and cry. As the aroma follows the flowers, heat pursues the fire. Your karma will track you as soon as you leave the funeral pyre. Karma decides how you'll be reborn. Karma or scorned, higher you may, straight as you're born, healthy or ill, long or short-lived, animal or human, sheltered or adrift. Karma is what makes the world go round. It's cause and effect right down there on the ground. For those going over and around, up and down, bound by their deeds, drowned by their needs. Is there any purpose to our life on earth if we just die and continue take birth? Is there any escape from the pain? Coming back again and again and again and again? You're not the flesh and you're not the mind. You're designed in the image of the Almighty Divine, assigned to a service of life. Attracted by unselfish action, serving Lord with dispassion. Acting only for his satisfaction, devoted souls achieve extraction from karmic reaction. Can you take some water? Okay, the drink. Our eternal state is to serve the great Lord, and to destroy our karma with the sword of holiness. Don't dare to waste stake your claim. Before it's too late, chant the holy name. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Okay, our episode of the Krishna Light has officially commenced here, and we're going to go back to 1972 to Australia. Prabhupada had visited, our guru for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness had visited Australia in 1971, and then he came back for a second visit in 1972. And by this time, a second temple had opened in Melbourne. Prabhupada came into Sydney, and then he spent several days in Melbourne. Well, this, what we're going to read today, has to do with the end of Prabhupada's stay in Melbourne, the engagements and programs he did, and then his returning back to Sydney prior to departing once again. So this is tells about how on the morning of Friday, the 7th of April, 1972, Prabhupada was visited by a group of followers of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The spokesman of the group, the manager of a well-known Melbourne vegetarian restaurant, seemed preoccupied with the concept of merging into the Absolute. Srila Prabhupada patiently explained that the concept of merging was not only unappealing, but also particularly impractical. You're all individuals. Every one of us is an individual. So how can you conceive of merging? Supposing, just like we are here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, how can we merge? You just study philosophy. We are here 8 persons. How can 8 persons merge into one? Have you got any idea how we can merge these 8 persons? How we can merge into one? And the answer is to realize ourselves. Well, if suppose you realize now how to merge. In realization, there is that. In realization, there is merging. Prabhupada shook his head. He held up his right hand, his fingers extended. Now, there are 5 fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How can they merge into one? And the answer, again, by realizing this. Prabhupada patiently repeated his example. No, these are 5 fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're all different. 5 fingers. How can they merge into one? What is the process? And then he asks the question, the name of the process, question mark? No, name or not name, how can these 5 fingers become merged into one? Tell me. And then Prabhupada answered his own question, them being unable to do so. He reached down and touched the microphone that was sitting on his desk. Just like, here is a thing, all the 5 fingers, capture it. He picked up the microphone with his fingers. It becomes one. Although they are 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they are one. And then the Mahesh Yogi disciple asks, becomes one, question mark? Prabhupada said, yes. If the interest is one, to capture this microphone, then it is a oneness, not of merging, but a oneness of purpose. All the 5 fingers act in one coordinated gesture for the purpose of capturing the microphone. At this point, Prabhupada replaced the microphone on the table. That means you cannot lose your individuality. But if your interest is one, then you merge into the interest or the purpose. Do you understand? Just like you're all Australian. How do you merge into the Australian conception? Because Australian, you have one interest. So individuality cannot be killed. You're all Australians, you're all individuals, but you can merge in the sense of all having the purpose to benefit and to preserve Australia, culture, and society. But when you make your interest one, then you merge into that interest, into that purpose. Your personality is different from his personality is different from yours. He is different from you. But because you have got one interest, therefore you are one. Just like us in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We are many people from many backgrounds, different genders from all over the world, but we have the purpose of honoring Krishna. We haven't lost our individuality, we haven't merged, but we have a common interest. So in that sense, yes, we are one. Good. Did you get the point? All right, so let's go then to a second song here in our Krishna Light show, and I'm going to sing you the Bhagavad Gita. Hold on a second. Let's go here. Hold on a second. Now you get the right. I'm going to bring you the Bhagavad Gita song, and then Bobby is going to share a selection with you from this book, The Great Transcendental Adventure. The Bhagavad Gita means Song of God, spoken 5,300 years ago by Krishna to Arjuna. And this is kind of a vernacular rap song, hip-hop summary of what Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, said on the battlefield of Kurukshetra to his target disciple Arjuna. In the Bhagavad Gita Song of the Supreme, Krishna screamed to his team member Arjuna, the cream of all the devotees. Arjuna, the things you do every day, the gifts you give, and every tasty veg you dish, offer to me with love and just see your soul in this. Krishna says, a cup of water makes me smile, though I could drink the ocean. Flower, fruit, and leaf are fine, if they're offered in devotion. Keeping me in the center, your karma will never interfere, because loving devotional service is the dharma of the spiritual atmosphere. I don't play any favorites, everyone gets what they desire, so someone longs for me in bhakti, I'm naturally inspired. Hare Krishna. Even if you mess up a time or two, I won't make any complaint. Just rise up again, you can still shine like a saint. The undiluted souls, Mahatmas, know reality, and feeling my protection, the flow of their affection comes to me. They sing my sacred names with voices sweet and state their rightful claim at my lotus feet. I see, maintain, and shelter all. I am the seed of everything. I am everyone's best friend. I'm the beginning, middle, and end. Arjuna, tell the people boldly, Krishna's devotee never dies. Men and women, high and lowly, everybody's equal in my eyes. Anybody who comes to me will never be denied. Bhakti Yoga will set you free. Success is guaranteed. Think of me, become my devotee, and you will live with me eternally. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. In the 10th chapter, Krishna describes what we call the opulences of the Absolute. Besides me, no truth exists. Do not be misled. Everything is strung on me as pearls on a thread. I am the taste of water. I am the light of the sun and the moon. I am the soul of all, and I am the strength of the strong. I am the fragrance of the earth. I am the forest fire, bright red. I am the blazing sunset. I'm the alphabet from A to Z. I'm the seed of everything. From me everything arises. I'm the face of great men. I'm the strength. I'm the wisdom of the wise. I am the Paramatma seated within everyone's heart. I am the life of all that lives. I am the ending, middle, and start. I am the sacred Vishnu, and of all sorts of lights. I am the sun, moon, and stars at night. The Himalayan mountains, unshakable, unbreakable, indicate me. I am the unlimited, endless ocean of vegetation. I am the banyan tree. I am Kandarpa, the god of love, like Cupid with his bow. Of cows I am Surabi, who gives milk and endless flow. Of hymns I am the Gayatri, of seasons I am spring. Of months I am November, the time of peace and harvesting. Of beasts I am the lion. Of conquerors I am calm. Of rivers I am the Ganges, flowing, liquid, and sublime. Of weapons I am the thunderbolt. Of men I am the king. I am Yama, lord of death, who judges everything. I am the wind that purifies the spirit apart from the flesh. I am logic, pure, concise. I am all-devouring death. All this is but a tiny indication. There is no end in my manifestations. All glorious and opulent creation springs but a spark of my radiation. What use, O Arjuna, for a more exhaustive list? Tiny spark of me pervades all that exists. Since I create the dual worlds of spirit and of flesh, the wise prioritize my service, keeping their hearts forever fresh. My devotees always think of me, follow me all the time, discussing me incessantly. They are theirs and I am mine. Because they serve with love and never swerve aside, from within their hearts I cause ignorance to subside. The wattage of knowledge I shine from within, so bright and in deep parental affection, guide them to the light. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. In the Bhagavad Gita song of the Supreme Krishna stream, to his team member Arjuna, the cream of all the devotees. Arjuna, the things you do every day, the gifts you give, and every tasty veggie dish, offer them to me with love and see your soul enriched. A cup of water makes me smile. If I could drink an ocean of flower, fruit, and leaf or fire, if they're offered in devotion. I don't play any favorites, everyone gets what they desire, so if someone longs for me and bhakti, fool, I'm naturally inspired. Even if you mess up a time or two, I won't make any complaint. Just rise up again, you can still shine like a saint. The undiluted souls, Mahatmas, know reality of being my protection. The flow of their affection comes to me. They sing my sacred names with voices sweet and stake their rightful claim at my lotus feet. I see, maintain, and shelter all. I am the seed of everything. I'm everyone's best friend, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Arjuna, tell the people boldly, Krishna devotee never dies. Men and women, high and lowly, everybody's equal in my eyes. Anybody who comes to me will never be denied. Bhakti Yoga will set you free. Success is guaranteed. Think of me, become my devotee, and you will live with me eternally. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Sri Krishna, your pure charisma, your fruit fight is so intoxicating. Singing your song down in Vrindavan, pleasing the hearts of the devotees and all the bhakti yogis. In a trance you dance, you climb, romance, a Rasa Lila with Radharani. In the Bhagavad Gita, you teach us bhakti. Your divine pastimes are so sublime, they fill the heart and refresh the mind, just like the monsoon takes relief from the lingering heat. You lifted a mountain with your little finger. You're the sweet butter thief known as Baby Gopal, killer of Thompson, the lover of Radha. Your complexion's dark blue like the ocean. I offer my devotion with all of my emotion. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. All right, so we gave you two songs so far today. One was the Bhagavad Gita song, and we started off with the Karma song. Most likely, I'm thinking we'll end with the song about Ganesh. But first, Bhai Bobby's going to come forward. We're going to jump forward a little bit. There's one more pastime of Prabhupada's in 1972 in Melbourne. We rented the town hall, and he gave a talk to a packed house there. And I'm going to save that for later. But right now, Bhai Bobby's going to read you about Prabhupada's coming back to Sydney. Remember, in 1972, he arrived in Sydney, spent some time there, then he went to Melbourne, spent some time, then he came back to Sydney before leaving. So Bhai Bobby's going to read a section that had to do with her being in Sydney and renovating the temple for Prabhupada's return trip. And then I'm going to backtrack and go back to Melbourne, and then we'll finish this segment with Prabhupada's second visit to Australia. We're on page 147 of this book, which we've advanced to throughout 12 segments of the Krishna Light Show. So, Bhai Bobby, you read from there and to there.
That's a different thing than you gave me, Ellie. It's not what you gave me. I had the orange part. Okay. Okay. Thank you. In the afternoon, Srila Prabhupada returned to Sydney to stay for a few more days before his onward flight to New Zealand. First of all, before I discuss what went on in Sydney and Melbourne, he was going to New Zealand. They were opening a new temple there. And for that, they had purchased deities, really beautiful Radha Krishna, in India. And they were being shipped, first of all, to Sydney. And they'd asked me to be there to paint them on arrival. And I was curious, why was I painting brand new deities? Don't they come painted? But anyhow, whatever was going to occur, so I was ready with my artwork, with my paintings, and my paints and brushes for the arrival of the deities. And the couple that were going to be there to establish them in New Zealand arranged for them to be brought in. And when they took off the cloths that covered them, I saw they were absolutely free of any paint or any kind of carvings. Very often when you buy carvings, deities in India, they have bangles, they have crowns, they even have clothing, shawls. And I inquired, how is it they're just simply straightforward bodies with nothing carved onto them? And it turned out they'd had them ground off. Before shipping to Australia, they'd taken off with one carver all the appendages, which made it difficult to be able to dress them. And they'd even taken off all the paint. And actually, this was not very pleasing. Prabhupada was kind of furious. He always said, Krishna appears as he wishes to come. So from then on, whenever I received deities in any temples, I understood, don't do anything to them. They're perfect. Krishna appears, and that's the way he is. So now I very rarely paint deities. I'm an artist, but they have to twist my arm to do any correction if some of the paint wears off, because Krishna is as he is, and we shouldn't change him. That was the idea of that. So anyway, moving on, touching down at Sydney's Kingford Smith Airport, Prabhupada and his entourage quickly crossed the tarmac. A group of devotees received Prabhupada respectfully at the terminal door, and soon he was en route to the temple. Since Mohanananda's phone call a few days before, the Sydney devotees had been immersed in a blissful fever of transcendental temple refurbishment. The somewhat run-down house in Glebe now had banana palms planted in the front garden. The temple windows were bordered with gold lattice work. Indian-style gold-painted wood fretwork arches bordered the veranda, and the creaky iron gate had been oiled. As Prabhupada walked in the front gate, he appeared very happy with these improvements. Those that he seemed not to notice were quickly pointed out to him, and the devotees were ready for Srila Prabhupada this time. In the hallway, before he entered the temple room, one young brahmachari bathed Prabhupada's feet with warm water mixed with fragrant rose petals. When Prabhupada entered the temple room, he saw it had been transformed. Vaibhavi had spent long, sleepless hours on a scaffolding, brushing gold over the embossed plaster patterns on the temple ceiling. The labor of love was well worth it. The result was quite impressive. Someone also pointed out to him the multicolored ceiling rosette surrounding a new chandelier and a matching chandelier in the deity room. The devotees had painted the skirting board and walls and wall trims gold. The Hare Krishna mantra in bold red Sanskrit lettering now adorned the area above the arched wall dividing the deity room and the temple. Many new posters with gold-painted frames now decorated the temple walls. Prabhupada nodded with satisfaction at all the improvements, and seeing this, all the devotees felt their hard work had been well worthwhile. So there was a little bit of transcendental competition going on. Of course, Sydney was the first established temple. And the house in Glebe was one of the old temples, one of the old houses that had lots of fancy work on the ceiling. But we'd not really gone to much effort to make it more than just acceptable. But then we opened a center in Melbourne, and they did a first-class job. So when Prabhupada went down there, he said, oh, this is even nicer. So transcendental competition started. And they had me up on a scaffolding as the artist. And like you said, sleepless nights. I don't think we slept ever when Prabhupada came. The only time I probably slept was when he was speaking and I would sit down to listen, and I hadn't had any sleep the night before, and people would be pinching me to keep me awake. It was part of the system that we just went 24 hours to serve. So I was up there painting all these beautiful decorations, different colors, gold leafing. And so when Prabhupada came, he was very pleased. He was pleased that we'd made the extra effort. That kind of transcendental competition went on in Australia so much in the old days. I don't know what it's like now, but it was considered one temple. We were one temple, even though we had many centers, and we're opening temples all over the country, but we were still one. And we would come together as a group to celebrate, like the BBT, the book distribution people. We would go out, distribute books, and then once a month, we'd come back together and have a big feast. We'd have kirtan, a special nice association because we'd been off for a month without any devotee association, and then they'd have a big feast. And there'd always be something outrageous. I remember one time we had a gulab jamun eating competition. Raja Lakshmi, one of the ladies, won the what we call the speedball competition, ate 24 giant gulab jamuns in 1 minute. Buddhimanta did the long distance eating and ate like 64 total. I didn't take part, not being able to do such a wondrous transcendental activity. But those are the kind of fun things we did, and then we'd go out and distribute books. So there was a lot of competition went on, but it was all one in the, like Caru just mentioned, in purpose, for the purpose of spreading Krishna consciousness in Australia. So here's Caru back. Thank you.
So if you didn't know before, now you know what oneness, at least according to the Bhakti tradition, means. Not that we're interchangeable, or that we all merge, but that we become one in purpose. I'm going to go back to Melbourne and read some sections that had to do with a public speaking engagement that Prabhupada gave in the Melbourne Town Hall. But first, let me just see if I can okay, here we go. This is going to be a song by Ganesh. We're going to punctuate our show with a little song about Ganeshji here. It's always auspicious to bring in Ganesh, the god of removing obstacles and paving your way. Ganesh is so fresh, killer on his throne, surrounded by incense, fruits, and gold. With heaps of sweets piled up in his bowl, he guards the gate and protects the threshold. When you're blessed by Ganesh, you conquer birth, disease, old age, and death, because he paves the path that leads to the soul, and he's known for removing all obstacles. Now, some may say it's mythological, illogical, or even philosophical, but with Ganesh, anything's possible, because elephant power is unstoppable. He's the son of Shiva and Parvati with an elephant's head and a big fat body. He uses a snake as a rope to hold up his pants. He rides on a mouse, and he loves to dance. He's a lord of creatures, possessed of divine features, attracts the minds of genuine true seekers. God of wisdom, beloved of children, known for protecting the homes that we live in. He writes the pages that the sages love to chant, dripping with knowledge like nectar, so we can comprehend the way to transcend, singing Jai to Ganesh, the yogi's best friend. We pray to Ganesh to remove the stress and pave the way to a place that's blessed. He unties the knots that confine our thoughts. He breaks up the blocks. He dissolves the walls. He unlocks the door to our inner core. He picks us back up off the floor. He's the benevolent elephant, super intelligent, dedicated to Ganesh, the son of Parvati and Mahesh. Here's to Ganesh because he's so fresh. Having to do with Ganesh's origins, the elephant head human body. High on the Himalayan peaks lived a goddess named Parvati. She was the wife of Lord Shiva, king of yogis and destroyer of demons. Shiva likes to do yoga deep in the forest, far away from the world and the things it lures. And when Shiva went away, Parvati stayed home, often feeling sad and alone. Well, one day she prayed and wished for a son that she could play with and have fun. Next moment, to her surprise, a beautiful baby lay before her eyes. Parvati could hardly believe her joy. The gods had given her a beautiful baby boy. Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha Om. 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 Fast forward a few years, Parvati wanted to take a bath, so she asked her teenage son to keep an eye on the path. He stood at the door, just like a guard, to make sure that no one would come into the yard. Well, wouldn't you know it, at that moment Shiva returned. Not realizing that his wife had given birth, he saw the boy and asked him to move. Not knowing his father, the boy refused. Now Shiva's all truth, conscious, and bliss, but he's crazy when he's angry, so don't get him pissed. Feeling dismissed, he started a rumble. An epic struggle right there in the jungle, and out of nowhere Shiva's trident went chop, cut the poor boy's head right off. When Parvati heard the noise outside, she came out to fight. When the boy died. Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha Om. 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 The demigods quickly rushed to the scene as soon as they heard Parvati scream. She turned to her husband with tears in her eyes and painfully explained how the boy was their child. When Shiva realized the size of the mess, he became upset, stressed, and depressed. That's when Lord Brahma came up with a plan. Hey, let's find another head so the boy can live again. Shiva said, we'll take the first head that we can find. We need to hurry because we're running out of time. In the jungle, they met an elephant, a wise old being who had attained enlightenment. He bowed to the demigods and offered his head. They took the elephant's head back to where the teenage boy lay dead. Shiva put the big head on the young boy's body. At first it looked funny and even ungodly, but Parvati said, it fits like a glove. Truly a face that only a mother could love. When Shiva saw that his son was refreshed, he embraced him and he called him Ganesh. Jai Ganesh, Jai Ganesh, Jai Ganesh Om. Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha Om. Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha Om. Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha Om. Thanks, Jason Gator says that my rapping is off the hook. Yeah. Yogeshini, keep rapping, Prabhu. I almost fell off my chair dancing to the beat. That's what we like to hear. We are so inspired. Ganesh so fresh, chilling on his throne, surrounded by incense, fruits, and gold. Heaps of sweet piled up in his bowl. He guards the gate and protects the threshold. When you're blessed by Ganesh, you conquer birth, disease, old age, and death, because he paves the path that leads to the soul, and he's known for removing all obstacles now. Some may say it's mythological, illogical, or even philosophical, but with Ganesh, anything's possible, because elephant power is unstoppable. He's a son of Shiva and Parvati with an elephant's head and a big fat body. He uses a snake as a rope to hold up his pants. He rides on a mouse and he loves to dance. He's a lord of creatures, possessed with divine features, attracts the mind of genuine truth seekers, God of wisdom, beloved of children, known for protecting the homes that we live in. He writes the pages that the sages love to chant, dripping with knowledge like nectar, so we can comprehend all the ways to transcend. Singing Jai to Ganesh, the yogi's best strength. We pray to Ganesh to remove the stress and to pave the way to a place that's blessed. He unties the knots that confine our thoughts. He breaks up the blocks. He dissolves the wall. He unlocks the door to our inner core. He picks us back up off the floor. He's a benevolent elephant, super intelligent, dedicated to Ganesh, son of Parvati Mahesh. Here's the Ganesh because he's so fresh. Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha Om. 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 Prabhana Radha Gopal says Jai Hanuman in response to our Jai Ganesha song. Radhe Shah, Manasa Ganga, thanks for joining us. If you put up a lot of stars and a lot of lights, if I see those all streaming up right now, you might possibly encourage me to sing one more song about Ganesha's father, Lord Shiva, but I'll have to see all those little things going off the screen, just like fireworks, before I can do that. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Let me just make sure that I go into my phone here. Okay, you convinced me. A third song in the Ganesh Parvati Shiva genre, if you will. I vow to Lord Shiva with love and respect. I invoke him with this slogan because I'm open to connect. In devotion because he's always in effect. In deep meditation with the snake around his neck. He's a husband of Parvati Mahashakti. He rides the white bull, the vehicle Nandi. He's the father of Ganapati, Mr. Mahadev. The Ganges flows down from the crown of his head. The crescent moon rests right next to his dress. He's the god of the dead, covered in ash, with a smile on his face, and his compassion is vast. He lives in Mount Kailash, also known as his Himalayan home, and in the shape of a lingam, he's a rolling stone. Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. The Shiva Shankar, the yoga master, also known as Nataraj, the cosmic dancer. He's the god of destruction, the lord of disaster. If you don't invite him in, he's the party crasher. He's the old school mystic, is Krishna dualistic. He shifts my mind from a place that's materialistic to a space that's more holistic. He's a magnetic ascetic who makes my soul shine. He awakens the snake at the base of the spine. Third eye wide open in yoga pose. He focuses my mind so the petals unfold. In deep concentration with breath control. He worships Lord Vishnu by chanting his names. As the Ganges drains to the sea, his bhakti flows at his lotus feet. Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. Om Namo Shivaya, the flames get higher as the corpse gets burned on the funeral pyre. The soul never dies, so you won't expire. When it's time to die, just let go of this attire. Exhale to release selfish desire. May my soul aspire to shine brightly like Shiva Nataraj, whom I admire, dancing on a demon in a burning ring of fire. Mahadev, you're said to be pure auspiciousness, also known as truth, conscious of bliss, creating, devastating, transformating. You save the whole world when you swallow the poison, destroy bad habits, ignorance, and greed, practicing detachment, compassion, and peace. To the Lord of meditation who lives in the Himalayas, to the King of Yogis, I offer these prayers. Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. 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 I bow to Lord Shiva with love and respect. I invoke him with this slogan because I'm open to connect. In devotion because he's always in effect. In deep meditation with a snake around his neck. He's the husband of Parvati Mahashakti, rides the white bull, the vehicle Nandi, father of Ganapati, Mr. Mahadev. The Ganges flows down from the crown of his head, and a crescent moon rests right next to his dress. Well, thank you for reading the cheering section there, Jason, and Yagashini, as well as Prabhana Gopal. Let's go back to Prabhupada's 1972, Jagadambika, pronouns, 1972 Melbourne visit. This is backing up a little bit from the excerpt that by Bobby read about. I used to book all the speaking engagements for Prabhupada, and one of our most successful ones was the Melbourne Town Hall. We rented it, established a date, we printed up these great posters which feature that same profile picture of Prabhupada that you find out on the banner of the Back to Godhead magazines. And we plastered those posters all over Melbourne. So let's read about the result of that engagement. Prabhupada entered stage right into a hall thick with fragrant incense smoke. Mridanga drums thundered, and the devotees leapt into the air fiercely, clashing their kartals and chanting with ecstatic abandon, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada quickly sat on the large, flower-bedecked, lemon and pale green Vyasasana brought from the temple, its new golden trim shining under powerful spotlights. At the completion of the kirtan, Prabhupada intoned obeisances to the previous spiritual masters. He picked up his own shiny hand cymbals and sang Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari, his voice strong and full of spiritual emotion. For the devotees seated eagerly around him in a semicircle on the stage, this was yet another opportunity for close, blissful association with their spiritual master. The hall was now packed to capacity. Close to 2,000 people had responded favorably to the devotees' advertising. Quite a mixed audience. Young men in denims, kaftans, tie-dye shirts and beads, girls in Indian cheesecloth skirts and crushed velvet jackets, academics, students, housewives, men with shoulder-length hair and polo-neck sweaters, and older Theosophical Society types. The vast hall was quiet with expectation as Prabhupada put on his dark-rimmed spectacles and closed his eyes. Munya Sadyaprishtaham Bhavabhir Lokamo Yatprita Krishna Sambato Yayatmasu Prasidati. Srila Prabhupada had chosen to speak from verse 5 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Divinity and Divine Service. Sutta Goswami addresses the sages at Naimisharanya who have assembled and questioned him on the absolute truth. O sages, I have been justly questioned by you. Your questions are worthy because they relate to Lord Krishna and so are of relevance to the world's welfare. Only questions of this sort are capable of completely satisfying the self. Prabhupada's voice was loud and strong. He stressed that the Krishna Consciousness movement was not a new or a concocted thing. It was very old and authorized. Prabhupada detailed the fragile condition of human life and the troubles of birth, death, disease, and old age. Quote, when we are within the womb of our mother, it is a very precarious condition. Any medical man knows this. We have to live there in this way, packed up in a bag, without any air. Just imagine if at this present moment you were put into an airtight condition. You would die within 3 minutes or 3 seconds. But in the womb of our mother, we have to live for a clear 9 months more in that airtight, packed up condition. Just imagine how troublesome this is. This is practical. We may have forgotten, so many things we've forgotten, but that does not mean that the trouble was not there. Similarly, at the time of death, the miserable condition is so acute that we have to give up this body, and sometimes when a man becomes very much upset, he commits suicide. He kills himself. Why? He cannot live in this body. It's so painful. Similarly, I, you, every one of us experience trouble at the time of birth and at the time of death. We are living entities, living souls. Birth and death take place in this body. Death means sleeping for 7 months. That's all. That is death. When this body is unfit for living, the soul gives up the body, and by superior arrangement, the soul is again put into a womb of a particular type of mother, where the soul develops another particular type of body. So it's a great science how the living soul comes into contact with this material body and how he is transmigrating from one body to another. We're going to fast forward here through the text of his talk and go to the question and answer period. There's a kind of a humorous incident that occurs here. So one young man during the question period inquired, is there any philosophy, doctrine, creed, or ritual that can reduce God to a human thought process? Prabhupada answered, no. God cannot be forced to come down, then he's not God. If God comes here, he comes by his own pleasure. You cannot force him to come. Just like at night, you cannot force the sun to rise. You have no power. Sun will rise in due course of time, but in the morning. At that time, you can see the sun, and you can also see yourself at that time as well. But at the darkness, you cannot force. You have no such searchlight scientific advancement that you can force. Similarly, if you cannot force a material object like the sun to abide by your orders, how can you force God to come down? So he comes down in his own will, not by your word. It's not like that. Next, a respectably dressed gentleman asked, what is your understanding of God? Is he something apart from us, or are we altogether God? Prabhupada's answer was concise. Well, as you are apart from me, Similarly, God is also apart from you. God is also an individual person, as you are an individual person, as I am an individual person. But the difference between God and you and me is this: you know your business, I know my business, but God knows everyone's business. That is the difference. So now, here it's described an unusual event here. Suddenly, the audience became restless. The devotees looked to see a tall, bearded man striding confidently down the aisle towards the microphone. A familiar sight around Melbourne, he was dressed as Merlin the magician, complete with pointed black hat adorned with silver moon and stars, leotards, and a flowing black cape. It was the wizard, a deregistered sociology student and somewhat of a despot cum lunatic. He had been proclaimed the official wizard of the University of New South Wales. Specializing in clever public word jugglery and buffoonery, he claimed to be researching tension resolution through absurd behavior. The devotees had encountered the wizard on numerous occasions ever since they arrived in Melbourne. He had sometimes attempted to publicly humiliate them in the city square. Although basically harmless, they found him at best a nuisance and often an annoying disturbance. Now, his brash, uninhibited behavior had led him to approach Prabhupada in Melbourne Town Hall. The devotees wondered how Prabhupada would deal with him. True to form, the wizard took the microphone and, much to the outrage of older members of the audience and to the delight of his hippie following, spoke out in his usual loud, affected voice. I would like to ask His Divine Grace a question, or I'd like to phrase my thinking at the moment. I know that I am a fool and a rascal, but I am thinking, am I the center of the universe? I think that I am the center of the universe. I think I must prove it sometime next year. And he rambled on pompously, his voice rising dramatically, until one of the devotees, Hanuman Prasad, unceremoniously wrenched the microphone from his hand. Srila Prabhupada turned to one of the other devotees and asked, "What is he saying?" The devotee said, "Prabhupada, he says he's the center of the universe." The hall was quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Prabhupada smiled and spoke calmly into the microphone. Everybody is thinking like that. Everyone has the concept, I am the supreme enjoyer and everything here is for my pleasure. So you're not that different, Mr. Wizard, from anyone else. Actually, Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, and he is the center of the universe. So your imitation will not last long. The audience, not only did they laugh, but they stood up and applauded, gave Prabhupada a standing ovation accompanied by whistles and cheers. Srila Prabhupada had exposed him as just another materialistic fool. The wizard had met his match. Prabhupada indicated for a kirtan to begin, and soon the hall was transformed by the combined sounds of hundreds of voices chanting Hare Krishna. Never before in Melbourne had so many people come together in one spot to chant. The combined sound was tumultuous. Nanda Kumar's drum soared, the cymbals clashed like a runaway locomotive. Devotees and guests alike danced on stage, in the aisles, and dressed circles, losing themselves in the ecstasy of Harinam. Towards the end of the kirtan, someone started throwing sweets called ladus off the stage. The crowd went wild, leaping for the sweets. Even after Prabhupada left the stage, the chanting continued for a considerable time. That was Prabhupada's engagement in the City Hall in 1972. And that pretty much is going to conclude our segment for today, except those of you who enjoy my rapping are in luck, because we're going to go exit the program this afternoon with a rap version of a medieval song written by Vallabhacharya. It's called the Madhur Astakam. Astaka means 8 verses, and Madhur means sweet. What Vallabhacharya is doing is glorifying Krishna, who has the flute to his lips, colored like a monsoon cloud during the rainy season, raven black hair, garland of flower around his neck, peacock throne on his crown on his head. So there are many aspects of Krishna which are madhur, which are sweet. And Vallabhacharya wrote these 8 verses about the sweetness of Krishna. The word for sweet is madhur. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear the word madhur come up numerous times during the course of the song. I'll sing it in the original language, and then I'll give the English translation, and then sing it once again. Okay? Madaram, 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 samaram, madaram, madarari patera, madaram, Vacharam Maradam, Manita Maradam, Charita Maradam, Vasita Maradam, Mamita Maradam, Madarari Patera Maradam, Reno Marado, Reno Marada, Pani Maro, Paro Maradam, Nitam Maradam, Sakam Maradam, Madarari Patera Maradam, Itam Maradam, Itam Maradam, Sakam Maradam, Sakam Maradam, Rupam Maradam, Tirakam Maradam, Madarari Patera Maradam. Maranam, Maranam, Taranam, Maranam, 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 Ramatam, Maranam, Mamitam, Maranam, Samitam, Maranam, Maradari Patera, Karam, Maranam, Kunjam, Marada, Mala, Marada, Yamana, Maram, Vichim, Maranam, Salmanam, Maranam, Kamaram, Maradam, Maradari Patera, Karam, Maranam, Gopi, Marada, Lila, Marada, Yotam, Maradam, Makam, Maranam, Kistam, Maradam, Kistam, Maradam, Maradari Patera, Karam, Maranam, Gopa, Marada, Gopo, Maradam, Nasir, Maradam, Sisir, Maradam, Jalitam Maradam, Haritam Maradam, Maradari Patera Maradam. Dear Krishna, your lips are sweet, your face is sweet, your eyes are sweet, your smile is sweet, your loving heart is sweet, your walking is sweet, everything is completely sweet about the Lord is sweet. Your words are sweet, your personality is sweet, your garments are sweet, your posture is sweet, your movements are sweet and your surroundings are sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord is sweet. Your flute playing is sweet, your footprints are sweet, your hands are sweet, your feet are sweet, your friendship is sweet, and your dancing is sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord's sweetness. Your singing is sweet, your drinking is sweet, your eating is sweet, your sleeping is sweet, your rupa, your form is sweet, the tilak, the mark in your forehead is sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord is sweet. Your deeds are sweet, your conquests are sweet, your feeding of hearts is sweet, your loving relationships are sweet. Everything offered you is sweet, your countenance is sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord is sweetness. Your necklace is sweet, your flower garland is sweet, your river Yamuna is sweet, her rippling waves are sweet, her waters are sweet, her lotus flowers are sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord of sweetness. The gopis, your cowherd girlfriends are sweet, your leelas, your pastimes are sweet, your meetups are sweet, your adventures are sweet, your heroism is sweet, your victory is sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord of sweetness. Your cowherd boyfriends, the gopas are sweet, the cows are sweet, your walking stick is sweet, your unlimited creation is sweet, your meetups are sweet, and your conquests are sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord of sweetness. Madaram, 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 Nayanam, Madaram, 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 Vidyam, Madaram, Gamanam, Madaram, Madadari Patera Madaram, Vacharam, Madaram, Charitam, Madaram, Vasaram, Madaram, Vanitam, Madaram, Charitam, Madaram, Brahmatam, Madaram, Madadari Patera Madaram, Reno, Madado, Reno, Madada, Pani, Madam, Adam, Naradam, Nityam, Madaram, Satyam, Madaram, Madadari Patera Madaram, Vitam, Madaram, Vitam, Madaram, Bhuttam, Madaram, Satyam, Madaram, Rupam, Madaram, Tirakam, Madaram, Madadari Patera Madaram, Karanam, Madaram, Karanam, Madaram, 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 Ramitam, Madaram, Ramitam, Madaram, Samitam, Madaram, Madadari Patera Madaram, Kunja, Madada, Mala, Madada, Yamana, Madam, Vichim, Madaram, Salanam, Madaram, Kamaram, Madaram, Madadari Patera Madaram, Gopi, Madada, Lila, Madada, Yukta, Madaram, Makam, Madaram, Vista, Madaram, Sista, Madaram, Madadari Patera Madaram, Gopa Marada, Gabo Maram, Nasir Maram, Chikir Maradam, Radikam Maradam, Padikam Maradam, Maradati Patera, Kanam Maradam. Sri Krishna, your pure charisma. Your flute playing is so intoxicating, singing your song, down in Vrindavan, pleasing the gopis and all the devotees and chanting the bhakti yogis. In a trance you dance the divine romance of Rasa Lila with Radharani, and the Bhagavad Gita you teach us bhakti. Your divine pastimes are so sublime, they refresh the heart and fill the mind, giving relief just like the monsoon from the lingering heat. You lifted him out with your little finger, you're the sweet butter teasing on his baby Gopal, the killer of counts or the lover of Radha. Your complexion dark blue like the ocean. I offer my devotion with all of my emotion. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Thanks for being with us for the episode of the Krishna Lite Show. We sang the Karma song to start things out, and then we sang a song on the Bhagavad Gita, and we added a few songs on Ganesh as well, and then finally we finished up with the Madhura Stockholm altogether. Thank you for being out there, being the recipient of my rap talents, such as they might be, to help keep me sharp for that time. Only God knows when it will come, when we resume our festivals, and I can do my master ceremony face-to-face with large audience all over the mountain states. But until then, this is what I have. You have me every Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock for the Krishna Lite Show. Thanks for tuning in. Visit our YouTube channel and subscribe for all the many, many dozens of lectures, documentary films, cooking shows, you name it. It's all there, hundreds and hundreds of videos to tell you everything you always wanted to know about spiritual life but didn't know where to go. The Caru Das, C-A-R-U-D-A-S, Utah Krishna YouTube channel. Go there and subscribe. You'll be happy to go. In the meantime, take your lead. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare